Zara Voss stepped off the transport shuttle with blood still under her fingernails from yesterday's hunting trip back on Terra Nova. The Galactic Military Academy's pristine white landing pad gleamed like polished bone beneath twin suns, and she couldn't help but smirk at the contrast. Back home, everything was red dust, razor grass, and things that wanted to eat you for breakfast. Welcome to Kepler Station, Cadet Voss. The voice belonged to a tall, blue-skinned Zenthri officer whose name tag read Commander Thex. His 4 eyes blinked in sequence, studying her like she was some exotic specimen. I trust your journey from the human colonies was comfortable? Comfortable. Right. 18 hours crammed into a cargo hold with recycled air that tasted like metal shavings and despair. Zara adjusted the weight of her duffel bag and gave him her best shark grin. Oh, absolutely delightful, sir. Nothing beats the smell of engine coolant and freeze-dried rations to start the day. Commander Thex's mandibles clicked disapprovingly. Apparently, sarcasm didn't translate well across species barriers. Good to know. The academy sprawled before him like a crystal city, all gleaming spires and floating platforms connected by energy bridges that hummed with power. Students from dozens of species moved between buildings with the kind of casual confidence that came from never having to check the shadows for predators. Zara watched a group of Melian cadets glide past on gossamer wings, their musical laughter carrying on the artificial breeze. Your dormitory assignment is in Sector 7, Thex continued, handing her a translucent data pad. Orientation begins at 0800 tomorrow. I suggest you use the evening to acclimate. Acclimate. There was that word again. The same one the recruitment officer had used back on Terra Nova when he'd explained that humans were being offered spots in Galactic Military Academy for the first time in 3 centuries. A chance to prove that humanity deserved a seat at the big kids' table after all those years of being treated like the galaxy's embarrassing cousins who lived in the dangerous part of the neighborhood. Zara made her way through corridors that felt more like museum galleries than military installations. Everything was smooth curves and soft lighting, designed for species that had evolved on worlds where the biggest threat was maybe running out their favorite tea blend. She passed a study lounge where a group of Valerian cadets were having what appeared to be a heated debate about quantum mechanics, their crystalline forms chiming like wind bells with each gesture. Her quarters turned out to be a modest room with a bed, desk, and what she assumed was meant to be a window, though it currently displayed a soothing view of some generic alien sunset. She dropped her bag on the floor and immediately began searching for hidden surveillance devices. Old habits. On Terra Nova, paranoia wasn't a character flaw. It was a survival skill. Computer, she said aloud, dim lights at 20%. The room obligingly darkened, and Zara allowed herself a moment to really look around. Clean walls, clean air, clean everything. No mud, no blood, no creatures try to burrow through the floor while you slept. It was going to take some getting used to. A soft chime announced an incoming message on her data pad. She glanced at the screen and found herself looking at the face of another human cadet. Pale skin, dark hair pulled back in regulation style, and eyes that held just a hint of the wariness that marked everyone who'd grown up in the colonies. Hey there, fellow Deathworlder. The recording began, and Zara couldn't help but laugh. The woman's accent placed her from somewhere in the Titan colonies, probably one of the mining stations. Name's Kaya-chun. Heard to the grapevine that I wasn't the only human crazy enough to sign up for this particular brand of torture. Thought, maybe we should stick together, you know? Safety in numbers and all that. The message included coordinates for what appeared to be a mess hall in Sector 5. Zara checked the time and realized she'd been sitting in the dark for longer than she'd intended. Her stomach was beginning to voice its own opinions about the day's events, and she'd learned long ago not to ignore it. The mess hall was exactly what she'd expected. A cavernous space filled with tables designed to accommodate every conceivable body type the galaxy had to offer. The air hummed with a dozen different languages, punctuated by the occasional translator glitch that turned philosophical discussions into arguments about fruit. She spotted Kaya easily enough. The other human was sitting alone at a table near the back, methodically working her way through what looked like a deconstructed salad while reading something on her data pad. Zara grabbed a tray and loaded it with the closest thing she could find to real food, then made her way over. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, settling into the chair across from Kaya without waiting for an answer. Kaya looked up and grinned. Zara Voss, I presume? You look exactly like someone who grew up wrestling death lizards for fun. Terra Nova, Zara confirmed, taking a bite of something that tasted vaguely like chicken and hoping for the best. You? Titan 3, deep mining station. Spent most of my childhood learning how to fix life support systems while dodging cave-ins and gas leaks. Kaya gestured around the mess hall with her fork. This place is like a luxury resort compared to home. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, two humans finding solace in each other's presence among the alien crowd. Then Kaya leaned forward, lowering her voice. So, she said, noticed anything weird about how the other cadets look at us? Zara had, actually, the sideways glances, the whispered conversations that stopped when she walked by, the way groups seemed to part like water when she approached. It wasn't fear exactly, more like the kind of morbid curiosity people had when watching someone juggle live grenades. They think we're dangerous, she said simply. Are we? Zara considered the question while watching a table of Andromedan cadets delicately sip their meal through specialized feeding tubes. Their home world was a paradise of gentle rains and herbivorous wildlife, where the most violent thing that happened on a regular basis was probably a strongly worded disagreement about garden arrangements. Probably, she admitted. The next morning brought orientation, which turned out to be 3 hours of speeches about honor, duty, and the sacred bonds that united all sentient species in their quest for galactic peace. Zara spent most of it counting exits and studying the other cadets. Military academy or not, there was something soft about most of them. They moved like people who'd never had a fight for anything more serious than a good grade. The Galactic Military exists to protect and serve, declared Admiral Corvash, a distinguished vegan whose silver scales caught the light as he gestured. We are the guardians of civilization, the shepherds of peace. Kaya caught Zara's eye and made a subtle gagging motion. Zara had to bite her lip to keep from laughing out loud. After orientation came physical assessments, which proved to be exactly as entertaining as Zara had hoped. The testing facility was a sprawling complex designed to evaluate everything from basic strength and endurance to reaction times and spatial reasoning. Students moved between stations in small groups, their performance carefully monitored by automated systems and the occasional instructor. Zara found herself paired with a Felinian cadet named Nyx, whose people had evolved from something resembling an oversized house cat. He had golden fur, large green eyes, and the kind of natural grace that made everything look effortless. He was also, as it turned out, completely unable to complete the rope climbing exercise that served as their first challenge. Perhaps, he suggested after his third failed attempt, his whiskers twitching with embarrassment, we could request an alternative assessment. Zara looked at the rope, then at Nyx, then back at the rope. It was maybe 20 feet high, standard military grade. On Terra Nova, kids climbed higher than that just to get fruit for breakfast. Or, she said, cracking her knuckles, I could show you how it's done. She was halfway up the rope before Nyx had finished blinking. The artificial gravity was lighter here than what she was used to, making the climb feel almost like flying. She touched the top marker, rappelled down using a technique her uncle had taught her for escaping from the canyon crawlers that liked to build their nests in cliff faces, and landed in a crouch beside the gaping Felinian. Your turn, she said cheerfully. The reaction time tests were even better. Cadet stood in the center of a holographic environment, while the computer generated various scenarios designed to test their ability to identify and respond to threats. Most of the aliens approached it like a puzzle, carefully analyzing each situation before selecting their response from a menu of options. Zara approached it like someone who'd spent her entire life one mistake away from being something's lunch. The first scenario materialized around her, a peaceful village market, suddenly disrupted by what appeared to be raiders attacking civilians. While the computer waited for her to analyze the situation and select an appropriate response, Zara was already moving. She grabbed a holographic weapon from a nearby vendor's stall, used an overturned cart as cover, and systematically neutralized every threat in the simulation while simultaneously herding the virtual civilians to safety. The computer spent several seconds processing what had just happened. Assessment complete, It finally announced, response time, exceptional. Tactical effectiveness, exceptional. Civilian casualties, 0. Behind her, she could hear the other cadets murmuring among themselves. Words like impossible and violent floated through the air, along with a few phrases in languages her translator couldn't identify, though the tone suggested they weren't particularly complimentary. Next scenario, she called out, grinning. The computer obliged, generating a more complex situation involving a hostage rescue in an urban environment. Zara solved it in 47 seconds. The third scenario lasted 31 seconds. By the fourth, she attracted an audience of instructors who watched with expressions ranging from fascination to alarm as she turned each carefully designed challenge into what looked more like a recreational activity than a test. "That's enough," called out Major Vent, a silver-scale draconian whose voice carried the authority of someone used to being obeyed without question. "Cadet Voss, please report to the evaluation station." Zara made her way over to where a cluster of instructors had gathered around a collection of data screens. She caught fragments of their conversation as she approached. Response patterns are completely outside normal parameters. Level of aggression is concerning. Perhaps we should reconsider the wisdom of admitting Deathworlders to the program. Major Vent looked up as she joined the group, his golden eyes studying her with the intensity of a predator evaluating prey, which was ironic, really, considering that his species had been herbivorous for the last 50,000 years. "Cadet Voss," he said, "your performance today has been remarkable." "Thank you, sir." That wasn't necessarily a compliment. He gestured to the data screens, which displayed charts and graphs that meant nothing to Zara, but apparently told the instructors everything they needed to know. "Your reaction times are roughly 4 times faster than the Academy average. Your tactical assessment capabilities exceed those of final-year cadets, and your willingness to employ what can only be described as extreme violence in response to simulated threats is unprecedented." Zara felt her smile grow sharper. "Is that a problem, sir?" "That remains to be seen." Major Vent turned to confer quietly with his colleagues, leaving Zara standing there like an exhibit in a zoo. She could feel the weight of dozens of eyes watching her, studying her, trying to figure out what to do with the dangerous animal that had somehow wandered into their pristine sanctuary. Finally, Major Vent turned back to her. "You'll be participating in advanced combat simulations beginning tomorrow," he announced, along with psychological evaluation sessions to ensure you're suitable for continued enrollment. Psychological evaluation, right, because obviously, anyone who could actually fight must be mentally unstable. "Understood, sir," she said, keeping her voice level. As she walked away from the testing facility, Zara found herself thinking about something her grandmother had once told her. "When you're the only shark in a school of fish," the old woman had said, "they're either going to worship you or try to kill you. Either way, they're never going to ignore you." Looking around at the pristine academy grounds and the soft, safe cadets who called home, Zara suspected she was about to find out which option they'd choose. They shot the Deathworlder cadet 3 times, and she tore the door off the training facility. The real test. 3 weeks later, Zara had developed a reputation that preceded her into every room like a weapon being drawn. The other cadets whispered her name in the corridors, sharing stories that grew more outlandish with each telling. She'd supposedly bench-pressed a hover tank, solved a tactical scenario that had stumped military strategists for decades, and once stared down a holographic dragon until apologized. Most of it was nonsense, of course. But Zara wasn't particularly interested in correcting the record. The psychological evaluation sessions had been a joke. Dr. Melax, a Tellurian counselor whose species communicated primarily through emotional resonance, had spent 6 sessions trying to convince Zara that her aggressive tendencies were actually trauma responses that could be healed through meditation and flower arranging. "Violence is never the answer," Dr. Melax had insisted during their final session, her tentacles quivering with sincere concern. "There must be peaceful solutions to every conflict." Zara had politely suggested that Dr. Melax try explaining that philosophy to a pack of razor wolves during mating season. The session had ended rather abruptly after that. Now she found herself standing outside Training Facility 7, at 0500 hours, watching the morning mist roll across the academy grounds while she waited for whatever fresh hell the instructors had designed for her today. The building loomed before her like a metallic mountain, its surface covered in sensor arrays and defensive systems that seemed excessive for a simple training exercise. Cadet Voss. Major Vent approached from the direction of the main academy complex, flanked by two other instructors she didn't recognize. One was another Draconian, tall and lean with scales that shifted color in the morning light. The other appeared to be Zerothian, all sharp angles and glowing blue eyes that never seemed to blink. "Sir," Zara straightened to attention, though she kept her muscles loose and ready. Something about this felt wrong. The instructors moved with too much purpose, and there was a tension in the air that reminded her of the moments before a thunderstorm back home. "Today's exercise will be different," Major Vent announced, his voice carrying an edge that hadn't been there during previous training sessions. "We've designed a specialized scenario to test the limits of human combat effectiveness." The limits of human combat effectiveness. Right, because apparently, demolishing every previous test hadn't been enough to satisfy their curiosity. "What kind of scenario, sir?" she asked. The Zerothian instructor stepped forward, his voice carrying the metallic undertone that characterized the species. "A hostage rescue situation in an urban environment. Multiple hostile contacts, limited resources, and civilian casualties are a primary concern." Sounded like Tuesday back on Terra Nova. "Understood, sir. When do we begin?" "Immediately." Major Vent gestured toward the training facility's main entrance. "You'll have 30 minutes to complete the objective. Failure to do so will result in automatic dismissal from the academy program." Zara felt her eyebrows climb toward her hairline. Automatic dismissal for failing one training exercise? That was a new policy. And an interesting one, considering they'd never mentioned it before. "Sir, with respect, that seems like an unusual stakes escalation for a routine training mission." "Nothing about this situation is routine, Cadet." The Draconian instructor's voice carried a cold satisfaction that made the hair on the back of Zara's neck stand up. "Your people claim to be warriors. Today, we test that claim properly. Your people, not cadets, not students. Your people." Like she was representing the entire human species in some kind of cosmic job interview. "Well then, time to make a good impression." The facility's interior had been transformed into a mock city block, complete with multi-story buildings, narrow alleyways, and enough shadows to hide an army. Holographic civilians wandered the streets with the jerky movements that marked them as low-resolution projections, while sensor networks tracked every movement with mechanical precision. Scenario parameters announce a computer's neutral voice. Terrorist organization has seized control of the central administrative building. 23 hostages confirmed on the third floor. Enemy forces estimated at 47 combatants with military-grade equipment. Rescue all hostages with minimal casualties. 47 enemies. Right, because apparently they decided that the previous tests weren't challenging enough. Zara checked her equipment loadout. Standard academy training rifle, non-lethal rounds, basic tactical gear, and a first aid kit that looked like it had been designed for treating scraped knees rather than combat injuries. No backup, no support, and no way to call for reinforcements. Perfect. She'd been moving through the simulation for exactly 17 minutes when she realized they were trying to kill her. The first clue was the weapons. What had been advertised as non-lethal training rounds packed significantly more punch than anything she'd encountered in previous exercises. The second clue was the tactical behavior of the enemy forces, which moved with precision and coordination that went far beyond what holographic projections should be capable of. The third clue was when one of them shot her in the shoulder with what was definitely not a training round. Zara rolled behind an overturned hovercar as real bullets sparked off the pavement where she'd been standing moments before. Her shoulder burned like fire, and when she touched the wound, her fingers came away sticky with blood. "Computer," she called out, pressing herself against cover as more gunfire erupted around her. "Halt simulation. I've been wounded by live ammunition." "Silence. Computer, respond. Emergency medical protocols." Still nothing. "Well, That answered that question. 47 enemies, live ammunition, no backup, and a computer system that was suddenly deaf to her commands. Someone had decided that the best way to test human combat effectiveness was to create a scenario designed to get her killed and see how long she lasted. The rage that bloomed in her chest was a familiar friend, warm and welcoming and absolutely murderous. Back on Terra Nova, anger was just another tool in the survival kit. Channel it properly, and it could keep you alive when everything else failed. Time to show these soft, safe aliens what a Deathworlder could really do. The enemy forces had positioned themselves with military precision throughout the building complex, creating overlapping fields of fire that should have made any approach impossible. Should have. They'd planned for someone who would follow standard tactical doctrine, advancing methodically and engaging from cover. They hadn't planned for someone who'd learned to fight by hunting predators that could smell fear from 3 kilometers away. Zara abandoned the training rifle in favor of weapons she found lying around the simulation environment. A piece of broken metal piping became a club. A shard of reinforced glass became a throwing knife. The content of her first aid kit became improvised explosives when mixed with cleaning supplies from a nearby maintenance closet. She moved through the building like a force of nature, bypassing the carefully prepared defensive positions by going through walls instead of around them. The first group of enemies she encountered was still trying to figure out where the loud crash had come from when she dropped through the ceiling and started educating them about close-quarters combat. Target acquired. She heard one of them say into his radio before she introduced his face to her improvised club. Human is... Oh, God, she... The transmission cut off as Zara relieved him of his weapon and ammunition. Real bullets, military grade, designed to kill. Someone had definitely upgraded this particular training exercise. The second group tried to pin her down in a corridor with coordinated crossfire. Zara responded by kicking to the wall into the adjacent room, circling around behind them, and demonstrating why bringing projectile weapons to a knife fight was a serious tactical error when your opponent didn't care about your rules of engagement. By the time she reached the 3rd floor, word had apparently spread about her unconventional approach to problem-solving. The remaining enemy forces had abandoned their carefully planned positions in favor of a more direct strategy. Shoot everything that moved and hope for the best. It didn't work. Zara found the hostages exactly where scenario briefing had indicated they would be. 23 holographic civilians cowering in what appeared to be a conference room while armed guards watched the entrances. The guards were real enough, with real weapons and real ammunition, but they'd made the classic mistake of assuming their enemy would attack from a predictable direction. The window exploded inward as Zara came through it feet first, glass cascading around her like crystalline rain. She hit the floor rolling, came up with a stolen rifle in her hands, and began systematically eliminating threats with the kind of precise, economical violence that would have made her instructors back home proud. "Hostages secure," she announced to the empty air, knowing that someone, somewhere, was monitoring the situation. All enemy contacts neutralized. Mission complete. The response was a whine of charging energy weapons. Zara spun toward the sound and found herself facing a squad of Academy security personnel in full combat armor. Their weapons were trained on her with professional precision, and their faces showed the kind of grim determination that suggested this had always been part of the plan. "Cadet Voss," announced the squad leader, his voice amplified by helmet speakers. "You are under arrest for excessive use of force, destruction of Academy property, and violation of training protocols." Excessive use of force. Right, because apparently the appropriate response to people trying to murder you is to ask them politely to stop. "On what authority?" she asked, keeping her hands visible but ready to move. "By order of the Academy Review Board. You have been deemed a threat to Academy personnel and will be detained pending formal charges." A threat to Academy personnel. Well, they weren't wrong about that. The question was whether they understood just how much of a threat she could be when properly motivated. "I see," Zara said, taking a step backward toward the broken window. "And I suppose this whole scenario was designed to provide evidence for those charges?" The squad leader's helmet tilted slightly. "Surrender your weapons and submit to detention. Resistance will be met with appropriate force." Appropriate force. From people who thought non-lethal training rounds were adequate preparation for real combat, people who just tried to have her killed in what they claimed was a training exercise, people who'd spent weeks studying her like a laboratory specimen before deciding she was too dangerous to leave free. Zara laughed, and the sound echoed through the ruined conference room like breaking glass. "You want to know about appropriate force?" she asked, dropping the rifle and raising her hands in apparent surrender. "Let me show you." The energy bolt caught her center mass and should have dropped her instantly. Academy stun weapons were designed to incapacitate any known species with a single shot, delivering precisely calibrated neural disruption that would render the target unconscious for hours. Zara stumbled backward, her vision blurring as electricity coursed through her nervous system. But she didn't fall. Pain was just another sensation, and she'd learned long ago how to function through worse than this. The second shot hit her in the leg and sent her to one knee. The third caught her in the shoulder, right next to where the bullet wound was still bleeding. And that's when the real fun began. The security squad was still trying to process what they were seeing when Zara ripped the conference room door off its hinges and hurled at them like a discus. 7 feet of reinforced metal and titanium alloy, weighing roughly 400 pounds, thrown with a kind of desperate strength that only came from a lifetime of fighting things that could break you in half. The door caught 3 of them and sent them sprawling in a tangle of armor and weapons. The remaining 5 opened fire with everything they had, filling the air with energy bolts and projectile rounds, while Zara used their own door as a shield and began her advance. What followed was less a fight than a natural disaster with a sense of humor. Security personnel trained for crowd control and minor disciplinary actions found themselves facing someone who'd learned violence from creatures that consider humans a light snack. Stun weapons designed for civilized species proved inadequate against someone whose nervous system had been conditioned by years of exposure to venomous predators. Tactical doctrine created for safe, predictable conflicts crumbled in the face of someone who fought like the universe was personally trying to kill her. When it was over, Training Facility 7 looked like someone had detonated a small bomb inside it. Security personnel lay scattered across 3 floors in various states of unconsciousness, surrounded by the wreckage of their equipment, and several walls that had apparently offended Zara in some way. Emergency lights bathed everything in pulsing red, and somewhere in the distance, alarms were screaming like wounded animals. Zara stood in the middle of it all, bleeding from multiple wounds and swaying slightly from the accumulated effects of 3 stun blasts, but very much still standing. Her hands were covered in blood that wasn't entirely her own, and her smile was the kind that predators wore when they just remembered why they were apex species. Training, exercise complete, she announced to the emergency response teams that were finally beginning to arrive. "I think I pass." Major Vent appeared at the facility's main entrance, flanked by medical personnel, and what appeared to be the entire Academy command staff. His golden eyes took in the destruction with the kind of stunned silence usually reserved for natural disasters. "Cadet Voss," he said finally, his voice barely audible over the alarms. "What have you done?" Zara wiped blood from her split lip and considered the question seriously. What had she done? She'd survived an assassination attempt disguised as a training exercise. She'd rescued holographic hostages from real enemies with real weapons. She'd demonstrated exactly why her people were called Deathworlders, and why that might not be as bad a thing as everyone seemed to think. "I graduated," she said simply. Behind Major Vent, she could see other instructors whispering urgently among themselves. Words like dangerous and unstable floated through the air, along with suggestions about immediate expulsion and formal charges. But there were other voices, too. Voices talking about combat effectiveness ratings that had broken every scale they tried to measure them with, about tactical innovations that had invalidated decades of military doctrine, about what it might mean to have soldiers who could do impossible things as a matter of routine. Zara listened to them debate her fate, while medical personnel fussed over her wounds and structural engineers surveyed the damage she caused. She thought about the soft, safe cadets who'd watched her like a dangerous animal for weeks, about instructors who'd try to have her killed rather than admit that their understanding of warfare might be incomplete, about a galaxy that had spent so long at peace that it had forgotten what real soldiers looked like, They wanted to know if humans deserved a place in their perfect military academy. Fine. She'd shown them exactly what humans brought to the table. The question now was whether they were smart enough to realize it was exactly what they needed. Outside, she could hear more shuttles arriving. Reinforcements. Investigators. Probably a few politicians who wanted to see the Deathworlder who'd single-handedly demolished a military training facility. Let them come. She had graduation ceremonies to attend and a reputation to maintain. After all, someone had to remind the galaxy that wolves still existed, even in a world full of sheep.